In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Yes, former President Donald Trump, who lost re-election in 2020, has officially announced that he plans to run for president yet again in 2024. And while the right-wing power players, including the conservative press and Republican politicians, seem to have soured on Donald Trump following the poor performance of his candidates in the midterm elections, the real question is, how do Republican voters feel? And I really do think there's a disconnect here. And I think anyone who is underestimating Donald Trump is making a huge mistake. And I'll make my case for that in just a moment. But first, why don't we take a look at all these right-wingers who are kind of dunking on Trump today, claiming that his speech was low energy and he doesn't have a shot. Well, I should note that his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner did not show up for the speech. They sat this one out, and it turns out that Ivanka and Jared have no interest in being involved in Donald Trump's re-election campaign. So, or I should say, second presidential campaign in 2024. Here is a video explaining where her heart's at.
Well, I spoke to several people who are close with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, and they tell me that the couple is not going to be involved in potential Donald Trump's second run for the White House. That includes campaigning for him. That includes, should he win, and being inside the White House.
They really didn't want him to run again, but he can't help himself. He's gonna do what he does best. And for those of you who are probably thinking, well, I mean, it's hearsay. Do we really know that's what Ivanka and Jared are thinking and feeling? Oh no, they confirmed it in statements to Fox News. This time around, says Ivanka, I'm choosing to prioritize my young children and the private life we are creating as a family. I do not plan to be involved in politics. Here, I support your decision, okay? Women should be able to choose. Good for you, Ivanka, sit this one out. Now, Rupert Murdoch is also refusing to back Trump, and the New York Post, which is under that Murdoch umbrella, of course, keeps slapping Trump down. In fact, here's their latest cover where they barely even make any mention of Trump. They certainly don't mention him by name. They focus the cover on crime, and then at the very bottom you can see Florida man makes announcement, page 26. Oh God, all right. And so what happens if you go to page 26? I was curious about it. Well, you'll find a little blurb that says, been there, done that. Love it. And then it was actually well written. I enjoyed it. They write this. With just 720 days to go before the next election, a Florida retiree made a surprise announcement Tuesday night that he was running for president. Trump kicked things off at Mar-a-Lago, his resort and classified documents library. Speaking of which, for anyone who thinks that Trump can't be investigated or indicted because of his announcement that he will run for president in 2024, you're mistaken. He could still be investigated, he could still be indicted. The question is, will Merrick Garland actually do it? And I wouldn't put any money on that. I just wouldn't. Now, there's more. The National Review, which National Review was never really a fan of Trump's, but nonetheless, they had their own piece on his announcement with a very simple headline. Let's take a look at that. No, just no. And in it they write, the Trump administration was chaotic even on its best days because of his erratic nature and lack of seriousness. Because Republicans should be known for their seriousness. He often acted as if he were a commentator on his own presidency and issued orders on Twitter and in other off-the-cuff statements that were ignored. He repeatedly had to be talked out of disastrous ideas by his advisors and Republican elected officials. He turned on cabinet officials and aides on a dime. Trump had a limited understanding of our constitutional system, and at the end of the day, little respect for it. All right, some harsh words from the editorial board over at the National Review. But even former Trump staffers, didn't have nice things to say about him following his speech. Alyssa Farah, who of course was his former communications director, said, "You try being high energy when you're running for president primarily to try to avoid indictment." Sarah Matthews, who's his former deputy press secretary, says, "This is one of the most low energy, uninspiring speeches I've ever heard from Trump. Even the crowd seems bored. Not exactly what you want when announcing a presidential run." In fact, the speech was low energy, I'll say that. He did go back to all his favorite hits. So his 2016 campaign, it kind of mirrored that, although the tone was less energetic, right? So the anti-immigration stuff, drain the swamp stuff, he leaned into all of that, and it worked for him in 2016. Will it work for him in 2024? Well, we'll wait and see about that. But what was really interesting was that during his speech, people were trying to leave, and they were blocked from doing so by security. Let's watch.
I actually saw people trying to leave, and people leaving early even before he was done. He's still speaking now, and then they, I think, perhaps a little concerned that the hall would empty out too much. They actually started preventing people from leaving, so now they're no longer allowing people to leave.
And there is some evidence of that, because more than just a reporter speaking into a camera to tell us that that's happening. The footage that you're about to watch shows a crowd. Let's put the video up, keep the volume down. I'll explain what's happening for our audio listeners. You see a crowd gathering by the exit, but they're unable to leave because security is blocking them from leaving. They're forced to stay there to listen to the entirety of this hour-plus long speech. And we all know what Trump is like. Trump is obsessed with crowd sizes. He doesn't want to be humiliated with a wide shot of a half-empty crowd, or half the chairs empty. And so these poor people, I mean, they wanted to be there in the first place. So how poor are they, right? But no, they can't leave. They're stuck. They're stuck until the very end. Love it. All right, now let's pivot though, because we heard from the Republican establishment, right? The power players in the media, the power players within the Republican Party, meaning politicians, elected officials, they've all kind of soured on Trump. But it would be a mistake to think of them as the voice of the Republican voters, because that's where I think the disconnect really does exist. I haven't seen any indication at all that Republican voters are willing to abandon Trump for Ron DeSantis. Now, let me be clear. I've seen some polls that indicate that more Republican voters would vote for DeSantis over Trump, but I actually think that it would be dumb to put too much weight behind those polls. Okay, the polls haven't been working for us. So I'm gonna need to see more than just, this one random poll shows that DeSantis is doing slightly better than Trump. And there's other stuff that's really standing out to me. For instance, while Trump certainly did get a lot of backlash during the, because of the poor performance of Republican candidates in the midterm elections, let's not forget that Trump's candidates easily won in their primaries against other Republican non-Trump candidates. Okay, so Republican voters overwhelmingly supported Trump's picks because they support Trump and his brand of republicanism. The other thing I want to kind of draw a little bit of attention to is, this video. So this is before the midterms, a little bit before the midterms. Michael Shore went to Miami specifically. Remember, Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. So if ever you would find a place with a higher concentration of DeSantis supporters, it would be Florida, right? Well, every single person that Michael Shore spoke to liked Trump more than DeSantis. Let's watch.
Trump may have to beat Ron DeSantis in a primary to get the nomination. Who would you support, Trump versus DeSantis?
Trump. I'm Trump.
Well, that's a tough one because I'd love either one as president, okay? And I'll tell you this, Trump's my president. In DeSantis will be my next president. If Trump wins, if he runs, he'll win. If he decides not to run, he may not. DeSantis will be president. But either way, it's going to be Trump and then DeSantis.
Who would you support, DeSantis or Trump?
Right now, Trump. Yeah, Trump.
What could change that?
They run in 2014? Yeah, Trump. And then for 2028, DeSantis.
That would be a tough call, but hopefully it'll be Trump for president and DeSantis for vice president.
I hate to burst that bubble, but you can't have two people from the same state on the presidential ticket.
Oh, okay. I think I would go with Trump.
I don't follow Mr. Trump because I like Trump. I go after Trump because I like the way he does things. I don't like very much the way he talks, but I don't care about the way he talks. What I do care is where are we going with Mr. Trump? And that's the point I want to get.
You know, the Cuban Trump supporters really need to shed the accent, which makes me find them incredibly endearing, right? Like I hear that guy and he's like a rabid Trump supporter, but I'm like, aw. Anyway, all right, let's move on. So I thought that video was telling. Obviously, that's not some scientific, study into where the hearts and minds of Republican voters happen to be at the moment. But I do think that, again, we haven't really heard much from the actual GOP voters, Republican voters. And the other thing that caught my attention today was this little video out of New York City. So let's take a look at that.
This is very disrespectful in the Arab states.
Ron has got too big for his britches.
He's out.
He has plenty of time to gain wisdom.
Trump or death.
Let him stay in Florida for a while.
Remember when they did the Saddam Hussein statue came down?
That's right, yes.
Remember when the Saddam statue came down?
Hey.
My father used to say to me, he used to say, son, I brought you into this world, I can take you out.
Everything DeSantis
We're taking him
has,
out.
everything he's got, he goes to Trump.
It's Trump or death.
Yeah. Now, those two guys are not necessarily representative of the majority of Republican voters, but I can't help but think about the low blows that Trump is very likely to use against Ron DeSantis. He's been mocking DeSantis today for bragging about what a Trump supporter he was when he was running for governor in Florida. Remember, he had a political ad where he's talking about his love for Trump. And Trump posted that video on Truth Social today and mocked Ron DeSantis. So I don't know, I think it would be a big mistake to underestimate Trump and think that the Republican establishment is providing a voice for Republican voters. I think that there is a disconnect there. I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. But if Democrats are giddy at the thought that Trump is running in 2024 and they think that means that they'll easily win the presidential election that year, I would just warn them, don't make the same mistake you did in 2016. Just don't.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.